My name is Kenny Dyal and I want to welcome you to the Scuba Diving channel. This channel is for anybody that is aquatically inclined or just aquatically curious. Michael Kest is not only a dive instructor, he's been diving and teaching from Hawaii to Florida for a very long time. He's worked in SeaWorld. He currently works at Disney as a dive master. Most importantly, the reason he's on here is because Mike's a trial attorney, and what that means is he has seen the courtroom. He talks to juries. This is kind of a big deal, especially as it comes to teaching and liability. So it's one thing to hear what you're supposed to do. It's another to see what actually goes down in the courtroom. So he's going to bring that perspective both as a dive instructor and as a trial jury attorney. There's a lot to learn from here, and if you don't want to get sued, this is the guy to listen to. I hope you enjoy. Mike, thanks for coming on the show.
My pleasure.
When did you start?
I started diving in '93 and became an instructor in 2001.
You've ran dive boats as well.
I have. I've dive mastered on boats and served as first mate and all that, so yeah.
And you have been safety at Disney for a long time for the Dive Quest program.
Yes, I have.
All right.
I've been working there.
You've done a lot of dive leadership, you've done a lot of instruction in a lot of different environments. And you've been doing it for a long time.
Yeah.
And you have been practicing law for a while.
Correct.
You
Yeah.
have your own law firm, and you're a trial attorney. You've seen the courtroom, you have spoken to juries directly. You actually have firsthand experience, and you've seen both sides of this coin.
Correct.
What is happening that you see still practiced in the dive industry that kind of makes you shake your head knowing what happens in the courtroom?
When instructors are taught and when they're, dive shops talk about liability, they focus on what can we do to avoid being sued. And in doing so, they talk about things like release forms and talk about making sure you explain to people that it's inherently dangerous and that things can happen if you, even if you do everything right. And instead of focusing on that stuff, we ought to focus on making the training better, focusing on what can we do to make sure the incident doesn't happen, not the lawsuit. And so instead of focusing on, hey, you need to sign this liability form and that prevents us from getting sued, an instructor should be thinking, okay, how do I prevent an event happening that would get me sued? In other words, how do I prevent someone from getting hurt? And the way you do that is through good training, through making sure that when you're actually going through all the training, you're making sure you're doing it, number one, by the standards, which is really important because their standards have been tested and they're rigorous and there's a reason we have those standards. But also, you're an instructor for a reason. Reading everything in a book just doesn't get the information that the student needs. Use the experience that you've had, explaining situations where maybe you, when you were coming up as a new diver, you had incidents happen and this is how you deal with them. So instead of just focusing on the book, remember why you're an instructor and not just some robot is teaching this class. The life that you've lived as a diver should go into your classes to help deal with all those things that you may have dealt with as a new diver, and try and remember back to that and say, okay, these are the things that we need to do. Again, you want to explain to them that it's an inherently dangerous sport. You want to explain to them that they need to sign these release forms. But again, that doesn't protect you the way I think it does. That protects you against negligence. It doesn't protect you against gross negligence. If you really screw up, you can still be sued and you can still end up losing a lawsuit.
Gross negligence is when you are negligent and you also pee in your wetsuit, right?
Well, I mean, that's pretty gross, but no, actually, look, there's two kind of divers. We both know this. Ones that pee in their wetsuits and ones that lie about it. So that's another issue for
gross
another
negligence.
Yes. No, gross negligence is, in layman's terms, it's essentially, well, negligence is where you've breached the standard of care, where you had something you were supposed to do and you failed to do it. Now, that is general negligence. Gross negligence is when there was a reckless disregard for this thing. It's not just I made a simple mistake. It's I either intentionally or with no thought whatsoever did something that clearly would have put people in danger, was well beyond the standard of care, and ended up causing incidents. And here's the irony of that. Most situations are not caused by general negligence. If you are teaching someone how to clear their mask and you teach them and you forget to tell them to tip their mask up the right way, and the first time they do it, it doesn't work, they can't get it cleared, you end up going up to the surface and oh yeah, I forgot to tell you that. That's maybe general negligence. That's probably not going to cause an incident because you have the ability to fix that. On the other hand, if you don't teach people to clear their mask in a pool, take them out in the ocean and rip their mask off of their head and go, oh yeah, here you go, put it back on, that would be gross negligence. Now there's obviously a lot in between those two, and that's where the gray areas start happening. But that's the key, is you still have to protect. You can't operate with no regard for people's safety. You should be doing that anyway. And that is the thing that's going to more protect you than some liability form that you signed or some speech you gave at the beginning of the class.
What should every instructor just start doing that you don't see enough of out there?
Watermanship, basically getting people more comfortable in the water. And I think we forget that this is a really important part of diving, because the easy way to prove this is show someone how to clear a mask in a classroom on dry land. They can do it 100% of the time after about 3 seconds of teaching them. Put them underwater and have them do the exact same skill, and it's a whole lot tougher, as we all know. The reason for that is because you're comfortable on dry land. You're uncomfortable underwater. Once you become comfortable, once you teach that comfort underwater, then it becomes a whole lot easier to do those skills. Again, this is about preventing incidents from happening and helping people enjoy their dives a whole lot more and become regular divers. There's too many incidents where people have a bad experience as new divers, and they end up not diving again for 5 years, and they're like, oh, I did want to do that. And this is where incidents happen, because they go, my buddy said he wanted to go down for mini season. I haven't been diving for 5 years, so I'm going to go down with him and go diving for mini season. And the only dives you have are just your checkout dives because you ended up hating the class. And you're like, I'll try it one more time. And this is where the problems happen. And so the more we can actually get people diving regularly, the more we can get them comfortable in the water, the less likely you're going to have those incidents that are going to eventually lead to a courtroom.
If that water comfort gets up, then even if maybe a skill isn't perfect, it's so much less likely to turn into a catastrophe.
Correct. For instance, let's say you can't clear your regulator, or you're having issues clearing your regulator, but you're comfortable in the water. What are you going to do? Oh, well, let me grab my octo, I'll put that in, and then figure out what I was doing wrong. Oh, I had my hand over the purge button, so I couldn't purge it, or something like that. You'll be able to think through things because you're not panicking. Because once you're comfortable in the water, that prevents you from panicking. That's really the key, is you're keeping that panic from happening by making everybody more comfortable in the water.
You started teaching, and then you became an attorney.
Correct.
And then you saw the courtroom, and you saw, like, it's very different than how people think it's going to be.
Yes.
What is that big disconnect?
Well, I mean, one of the big disconnects is what we already talked about, that, hey, if you've got a release form, I don't have anything to worry about. And that is a huge mistake for 2 reasons. Number one, you're supposed to be teaching your students with the same care you would teach your own family, own children. And if you're just going, hey, I don't have to worry about liability, and then you just your responsibility sort of just goes out the window at that point, that obviously means you're violating the standards on its own. The second problem is, as we talked about, just because you've got that release form does not release you from all liability. It only releases you from general negligence. And the problem with that is if you end up messing up real bad because you weren't paying attention, or you're just trying to get, churn students through, then you end up causing all kinds of problems, both for you, for your family, for the people who are hurt. It can be prevented so easily by focusing at the time and getting students through and making sure they're comfortable. And truthfully, it's a good business decision too. Dirty little secret in the industry, you don't make a whole lot of money off of an open water class. The key is to get students to come back, to get them to come back to become comfortable divers, come do nitrox classes, advanced classes, rescue classes, and all that. You're actually making money on those things. And for the diver, you're getting better as a diver, you're becoming more comfortable, you're enjoying it a lot more. And so it's a win-win for both sides of those. And so the more you can get people engaged and coming back to your shop and coming and diving more and going more out on boats, the more comfortable they're going to get, the more likely they're going to dive, the more likely they're going to buy their own gear and get the nice stuff, because they're going to say, look, it's worth it for me. If I go diving once a year, I'll just rent a BC. If I'm diving 4 or 5, 6, 7 times a year, it makes sense for me to go buy my BC. And again, a win-win for both. The person who buys the BC is more comfortable. The dive shop gets a sale, which works out for them. That care, that keeping people coming back, is a really important part of the industry that I think is overlooked a lot of times. As everybody knows who's in the dive industry, you end up making some of your best friends in the dive industry.
Absolutely.
And so if you can get them coming back, people who start out as students may end up becoming an instructor, or who knows, may end up buying the business from you 10 years later. There's a whole lot of complicated law that goes into a trial, but the truth is, if you treat them like your family, if you treat them like you would your friends, if you treat someone like that and presume that you want to protect them the same way you would family or friends, you're probably going to be okay. The doctor who messes up, and they may not be the worst doctors, they may have a single incident or something, but when they mess up, they're not the ones who are usually getting sued. The ones who are getting sued are the ones with the worst bedside manner, because the patient in that situation generally doesn't like the person and has no reason to believe that they were doing what was in their best interest, even if they were. That probably goes the same with the dive industry. If you've got a shop who cares about you, who takes care of you, does everything they can to support you, it's less likely you're going to be sued.
Did anything change for you as far as how you taught from when you started teaching that really wasn't there until you started seeing the courtroom?
In addition to teaching, I also worked in dive shops. And in those dive shops, there was this idea of you don't want people in the shop, you want them moved through as quickly as possible. That never made much sense to me, but I guess I couldn't really figure out why it didn't make much sense, because they would say, hey, look, we need to make money, we got to get people through. It wasn't until after I started realizing that not only was it bad business because people weren't coming back, but it also could create those liability issues. Law school kind of reinforced that, yeah, I didn't know why it seemed like a bad idea, but that sort of reinforced that, yeah, this is why this is a bad idea.
You have worked in dive shops, you taught, you have done safety at an aquarium for many years, and you've had your own law practice for a while now. So you're still doing all of these things.
Yes.
And I know you're going for another master's degree.
Correct.
How do you keep a work-life balance?
By diving, really. Like, diving is my getaway from dealing with all the sharks that I deal with as an attorney. The ones down in the ocean are a lot tamer than what I deal with in the courtroom. That's one of the great things about diving is you get under the water, there's no phones, there's no emails. It is just you and the ocean and maybe a couple of your buddies, and there's nothing attaching you to the surface. Now, eventually you got to come up, but man, for that 45 to 60 minutes, it's a release. It allows you to come back to earth and realize, okay, yeah, there's some good things here.
Do you have a message for anybody that might be experiencing burnout as an instructor?
Absolutely. If you're an instructor, take some time off. I got burnout both as an instructor and as a dive master. I was working some pretty solid hours. And when I stopped doing it, I remember not wanting to dive after that. Got back in the water after about, I think it was like 3 or 4 months of not diving. Got under the water and went, oh, right, this is why I love doing it. And so take some time off and go fun dive, because if everything is work, even if it's a job you love, it's all work. There are certain things you have to do. If you take that time off and go diving on your own or go diving with a buddy where you're not watching anybody for a while, it gets that love back into it. It helps you kind of decompress, no pun intended.
Mike, thanks for coming on.
All right, no problem.
If you want the full-length, uncensored interview, go to sweetwaterscuba.com.